heard that remark of yours." "It will be well for you to attend to your own business and keep your mouth shut," responded his father angrily. Beneath the calm exterior which the young man preserved, the old Mainwaring blood was now fast rising, but he made no reply, for at that instant Mr. Sutherland announced the name of the next witness. "Harold Scott Mainwaring." There was a sudden hush throughout the court room, broken an instant later by a low murmur of mingled astonishment, incredulity, and wonder, as the private secretary rose and walked towards the witness stand. A few comments reached his ears, but he seemed unconscious of them, and having taken his place, turned towards the audience a face cold and impassive, inscrutable to his enemies, who could read nothing of the conflicting emotions beneath that calm, immobile surface. He saw the crowd of upturned faces, incredulous, wondering, curious. He caught the mocking smile of Mrs. LaGrange and Ralph Mainwaring's dark, sinister sneer, but he took little note of these. Like an arrow speeding to the mark, his glance sought the face of young Hugh Mainwaring. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment there was recalled to each a starlit night on one of the balconies at Fair Oaks, and the parting words of young Mainwaring to the secretary, "I'm your friend, Scott, and whatever happens, I'll stand by you." With swift intuition each read the other's thought, and although there was no outward sign, Harold Mainwaring knew from that instant that there would be no retraction of that pledge. The slight ripple of excitement died away while the witness was sworn, and the crowd listened with interest even to the preliminary interrogatories. "Where were you born?" asked the attorney. "In Melbourne, Australia," was the reply, while deep silence awaited Mr. Sutherland's next question. "Mr. Mainwaring, I believe you are familiar with the will just read, are you not?" "I am." "Please state when and under what conditions you gained your knowledge of this will." "I first learned that such a will had existed and knew its general terms between 5 and 6 years since, through information given me by James Wilson. From data found a little over a year ago among the personal letters of the deceased Hugh Mainwaring, I ascertained that the will was still in existence, and on the 7th of July last I discovered the document itself and became personally familiar with its contents." At the mention of the name of Hugh Mainwaring and of the date so eventful in the recent history of Fair Oaks, the interest of the crowd deepened. "Did you discover the document accidentally or after a special search for it?" "As the result of a systematic search for more than a year." "Please state whether you took any steps leading to the discovery of this will during the 4 or 5 years immediately following your first knowledge of it, and if so, what?" "As I first learned of the will soon after entering Oxford, my studies necessarily occupied the greater part of my time for the next 3 or 4 years, but I lost no opportunity for gaining all possible information relating not only to the Mainwaring estate, but more particularly to Hugh Mainwaring and his coadjutor, Richard Hobson. Among other facts, I learned that immediately after the settlement of the estate, Hugh Mainwaring had disposed of the same and left England for America, while about the same time Richard Hobson suddenly rose from a penniless pettifogger to a position of affluence. As soon as my studies were completed, I sailed for America, with the avowed determination of securing further evidence regarding the will, and of establishing my claim to the property fraudulently withheld from my father and from myself. In the securing of the necessary evidence I succeeded beyond my expectations. As Hugh Mainwaring's private secretary, I gained access to the files of his personal letters, and soon was familiar with the entire correspondence between himself and Richard Hobson, from which I learned that the latter was demanding and receiving large sums of money as the price of his silence regarding some past fraudulent transaction. The nature of that transaction I ascertained in this marginal note, in Hugh Mainwaring's handwriting, upon one of Hobson's letters, which happened to be more insolent in its tone than the rest. With the permission of the court, I will read it. Quote, "He insinuates that I destroyed the will. I only gave him to understand that it was lost. Little he dreams it is still in my possession and will be, until such time as I, too, have to make final disposition of my estate. Why I did not destroy it, or why I do not, now that the property is rightfully mine, I cannot say, except that I dare not. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all." Unquote. With the discovery of these words, concluded the witness, began my search for the will itself. "From the discovery of this letter, which led you to believe the will was still in existence, you prosecuted your search for the document until the 7th of last July?" "Yes, sir, whenever an opportunity for search was offered." "Where did you finally find the will?" "In the safe in Mr. Mainwaring's private apartments at Fair Oaks." "On July 7th last?" "Yes, sir." That was the day on which you, acting as Hugh Mainwaring's secretary, had drawn at his dictation his last will and testament, was it not?" "It was." "Mr. Mainwaring," said the attorney deliberately, his eye quick to read the faces about him, "is there in your mind any connection between that event and your discovery of this will?" "Only the most indirect," was the reply, given with equal deliberation. "The fact that Hugh Mainwaring was making final disposition of his property naturally spurred me on to increased action, since, in making final adjustment of his papers, he would be more than likely to destroy the old will. This incentive, together with the fact that opportunity was given me for a more thorough search than I had been able to make prior to that time, combined to make the discovery of the will." "Please state the time and circumstances of your finding it." "I found it late in the afternoon, while Mr. Mainwaring and his guests had gone for a long drive. I determined to leave no place unexplored where it could possibly be concealed. After about an hour's search, I found it." "What did you then do with it?" "I retained it in my possession, and at the earliest opportunity secreted it within my own room." "It was in your possession during the following evening and night?" "It was." "Mr. Mainwaring," said Mr. Sutherland with marked emphasis, "please state whether you mentioned to Hugh Mainwaring the discovery of the will, or had any conversation with him relating thereto." "I made no mention of the matter to him whatever. Except for a few moments immediately upon his return, I did not see him alone until about midnight, when he appeared fatigued, and I would not introduce the subject at a time so inopportune." After a slight pause, Mr. Sutherland continued, "You claim to be the lawful son of Harold Scott Mainwaring mentioned in this will, and as such the lawful heir, under its terms and conditions, of the Mainwaring property?" "I do." "Has it not generally been understood among those supposed to have knowledge of the facts in the case that Harold Scott Mainwaring, at the time of his death, had no living child?" "That has been the general understanding." "Will you explain how the fact of your existence has been kept concealed all these years?" The silence following the attorney's question was so deep as to be oppressive, until broken by the answer of the witness, clear, cold, and penetrating to the remotest corner of the crowded room. "Within an hour from my birth, a dead child was substituted in my place, and I was secretly given by my father into the keeping of trusted friends, with instructions that until I had nearly attained my majority, I was not even to know of his existence or of the relationship existing between us." "Mr. Mainwaring," said the attorney, "are you willing to state the reasons for such an extraordinary proceeding on his part?" For the first time the impassive bearing and the calm, even tones of the witness gave way. The smoldering fire in his dark eyes burst forth, as with impassioned utterance and voice vibrating with emotion, he replied, "It was done because of sorrow, more bitter than death, in his own heart and home, of which he wished me to know nothing until I had reached the years of manhood, and could understand the nature of his wrongs. It was done that I should be forever barred from all association with, or knowledge of, the base, false-hearted woman who bore his name only to dishonor it, who, though she had given me birth, yet believed me dead, that I might live as ignorant of her existence as she of mine. It was done because of his love for his only child, a love for which I would today gladly suffer dishonor and even death, if I could but avenge his wrongs." Only Harold Mainwaring's attorneys understood the spirit which prompted his words, but they carried his audience with him in a sudden wave of sympathy, and as he paused, men applauded and women sobbed, while the judge vainly rapped for order. One figure alone remained motionless, spellbound. Amid the general excitement, Mrs. LaGrange sat as though turned to stone, her hands clasped so tightly that the jewels cut deeply into the delicate flesh. Every vestige of color fled from her face, her lips ashen, her eyes fixed upon the witness, yet seemingly seeing nothing. Gradually, as she became conscious of her surroundings and of the curious glances cast in her direction, she partially recovered herself, though her eyes never left the face of the witness. "Mr. Mainwaring," continued the attorney, when order had been restored, "when and how did you first learn that you were the son of Harold Scott Mainwaring?" "My first knowledge regarding my own father I received at the age of 15 from my foster parents, who told me of the manner in which I had been given to them, and of the death of my father a few years later, but the full particulars I did not learn until my 21st birthday, when I received a letter written by my father soon after my birth, and entrusted to the keeping of my foster parents until I should have attained my majority.